The outcome of the provost's decision is that 3 pods have been formed at the university to service researchers and to provide research administration. 3 schools were designated by Provost Blake as the pod leaders. They are the School of Medicine, the School of Public Health, and our pod leadership comes from Columbian College. The best one, I might add. The ADRs in each of the 3 lead schools are responsible for the function of their pods. So at GSEHD, as a member of Pod 1, joins 3 other schools. I've already mentioned Columbian College, and the Elliott School and the Business School are part of our pod. Later in the summer, actually, just in September, the provost asked Pod 1 to engage the libraries and the college professional studies as members of the pod. Altogether, there are now then 6 units that Pod 1 is servicing. During the summer, I joined the ADRs from Columbian, Elliott, and the Business School to work with GW's Human Resources to interview and develop a slate of 11 research administrators to undertake the work of the members, the research work for the members of Pod 1. The school research administrators who were chosen for a slate that was approved by the provost are now all in place in Pod 1, and Columbian College's ADR, Evie Downie, faculty in the Department of Physics, is joining us today to describe the transfer of research administration to Pod 1 and to discuss the great team of research staff who have been hired in Pod 1, and that, fortunately for GSEHD, includes our great Vinnie and Courtney, who we couldn't have lived without. And we're very happy that they're members of Pod 1. Evie will also talk about the process and procedures to assure coherent and successful outcomes for faculty researchers. Today, Evie's joined by Juliana Smith, who has been selected as the manager for Pod 1, and Evie will introduce Juliana during her talk. But before I turn the meeting over to Evie, I just want to ask the GSEHD community, and I believe a couple of our colleagues from DAR have joined us. Susan Berthlein and Sarah Katz are on the line as well. But I want to ask everybody to observe the protocol that we use for most of our GSEHD meetings in the virtual world. And Callie's just putting it up here now for those of you who might not be familiar with it. Basically, we ask that you send your questions to Meg Holland, who will put them in the queue, and that we will take the questions after our presenters are finished. So Meg will either read your question or ask if you would like to be on mic, provide you access to the mic. So thank you, Callie, for putting those up. I appreciate that. So I'm delighted now to take the moment to tell you that we have a great pod leader, somebody who I hadn't known until early summer, as well as I know her now. We certainly sat in a number of ADR meetings over the last while, and Evie's just been a great partner. The 4 research deans who were responsible for interviews and the slate for the pod spent a lot of time together, and Vanessa Perry from the Business School and Graham Cornwell from the Elliott School made for some very special moments during a very, very, very busy summer. So Evie, I turn this meeting over to you, and I thank you in advance for all that you're going to say and all the questions that you're going to answer. And Juliana, to you, welcome as well.
Thank you very much, Max. I'm just going to share my screen. So here we go. So firstly, let me say you guys have the best ADR, and it has been fantastic to work with Max and get to know her. And she knows everybody in GW is the conclusion that we drew after the first few weeks of working together. So what I want to speak to you about today is just to introduce the pod, explain to you how the pod will work with regards to GSEHD, and give you an opportunity to ask some questions about that. So firstly, welcome to Pod 1. We think we're the best pod. There's some slight competition between the pods, and I think we're winning all round. But pod 1 is going to provide support for, as Max mentioned, Graduate School of Education and Human Development, the Business School, the Columbian College of Arts and Sciences, the Elliott School of International Affairs, and our lately added, but also very keen to be part of the pod, College of Professional Studies and Libraries and Academic Innovation. The idea is that each of the pods will provide administrative support for proposals and post-award work. So we don't take over the infrastructure of the colleges, we don't change the rules of the colleges, we don't remove the role of the ADR, we just provide the administrative support to enact what you guys are doing in research. And the one thing about the pods that actually might bring us some advantage, so as you're all aware, or you're probably aware, we have lost some staff in the process. So between the 3 schools that had research staff before this started, we had 13 staff members, and now we only have 11. But part of the hope is that having the Office of Sponsored Project staff embedded in the pods will mean that things become more efficient. And just to put things in context, OVPR, who are the umbrella organisation in which the Office of Sponsored Project staff sit, they lost 13 positions in the process. So they went from, I can't remember the exact numbers, but they're in the 30s, and they lost 6 vacant positions and 7 actual staff members. And so it's a much leaner organisation, but the hope is that by putting the pre-award and the post-award people that used to review projects directly in OVPR with the pods, and the idea is they're going to be co-located when we're ever back on campus, that then we'll have a much more efficient relationship, and it will be better for all concerned, and we'll have less bouncing backwards and forwards between OVPR and the schools. So what are you becoming part of? So I've emphasised the pods will provide research administrative support. In order to make the positions, you have to make them inside a home org when we were rehiring people into the positions. And so the reason they chose CCAS as a lead school is just because we have the largest research volume of the schools in the pod. And that was the way they decided it. It wasn't any kind of moral decision. It was basically, you're the ones with the largest volume of problem. You guys can have the administrative responsibility of leading the school. But the school policies and the routing chains and approval policies for all of the schools in the pod are respected and remain in place. So we're basically the ones doing the administrative part of things, but we're enacting the policies. We're coming to Max for approval or to your FD for approval when we need to do things. Your ADR will continue to provide support for GSEHD research development. So Max will continue to work with you all to help you identify funding sources for the research you want to do and help you with proposals and understanding. Courtney Boyce will continue to provide the pre-award support for GSEHD. And in doing the interviews, we recognise Courtney's talents. So Courtney is now additionally a supervisor of 3 post-award staff. So I'll show you the kind of structure of the pod in a moment. But Courtney will be a core part of the pod. She'll be providing your pre-award support and also supervising the 3 post-award staff. Vinnie Mitchell will continue to provide post-award support for GSEHD and also some post-award support for the School of Business. And Courtney is Vinnie's direct supervisor, and Courtney reports to Juliana, who we'll introduce in a minute. You should note that the school research administrator roles and functions will evolve to best serve pod members. So if, for example, GSEHD's research vastly expands over the coming years, then we would work and see if Courtney and Vinnie felt that they needed more support, then we would adjust and bring in other people to assist. So it wouldn't just be, we're not just going to statically hold to the idea that Courtney does GSEHD's, all of GSEHD's pre-award and Vinnie does all of GSEHD's post-award. If things evolve, the loads within the pods will also evolve, and we would do that in discussion with the pod staff, but also in discussion with the ADRs, so that any kind of changes like that would be fully discussed and checked by people who actually really know the system well. The Office of Sponsored Project staff who are embedded in the pods, who are going to be working with us very closely, they will still report to the Office of Sponsored Projects. So the idea is that the school research administrator side of things, all of the pod school research administrator staff, will work to prepare proposals until they're basically finished, and the OSP people are just providing a last review to check for compliance. And the same with post-award, that the OSP staff are not generating anything, they're simply reviewing and approving. And because of that, because they want to maintain a separation for audit purposes so that the person reviewing and approving reports differently than the people generating the work, the OSP staff will still report to OSP management and not to the pod. Pardon me. This is what the pod structure looks like. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor. We have Juliana at the top. She's the pod manager, and she'll supervise all 11 staff ultimately. But we have some that report directly to her. So everybody who does a mixture of pre and post award will report directly to Juliana, and everybody who does pure pre-award. So we have 2 people that do pre-award only at the moment. So that's Jessica Harb. Jessica Harb and Joseph Fercherio do purely pre-award. All of the others here do pre-award and post-award, and they all report to Juliana. Courtney reports to Juliana as she's doing GSEHD pre-award, and then reporting to Courtney will be Gary Reynolds, who's doing post-award for CCAS. Vinnie Mitchell is going to be doing the GSEHD post-award and the School of Business post-award, and Abdiel Castillo will be doing the Elliott post-award. And you can see that the mix of 11 individuals that we ended up with is actually a mixture of former CCAS staff, former GSEHD staff, former Elliott School staff, and also 2 members of OVPR. And we found that to be really good. We have some special insights when we have our regular meetings from what the kind of OVPR side of things would be. The OSP staff embedded in Pod 1, we were recently told that the contracting officer is going to be Lisa O'Neill, that the pre-award SPAs will be Rebecca Egger and Rada Fagoy, and post-award will be Robert Harrison and Rinky Segu. So some of you may have encountered those folks before in the past, but we're hoping that we're going to build up some really good relationships with them, and then that should make processes smoother for everyone. So how are we going to know the pod is working? So we've had this dramatic change in how we're structured, and we have different levels of staffing, and how are we going to know that the pod is fulfilling its function? Well, the first thing that we're doing, that we're already in the process of doing, is forming a pod advisory council. So we're going to have 1 or 2 representatives from all 6 units involved in the pod. The smaller units are only going to provide 1, and the larger will provide 2, so that we have a committee of people who are kind of on the front end as users of the pod, consumers of the pod, who can kind of share their own personal experiences, but also reach out with their colleagues and share their experience. And so we can work together and figure out how best to run the pod. One thing I should have pointed out at the beginning that I normally do is I'm an active experimental nuclear physicist, and I've run programs that involve summer education of students abroad. So I've experienced most of the headaches that you can have with sponsored research, although I'm always, I would say, happy to learn about more headaches, but that's perhaps not the best expression. But as well as being the leader of the pod, I'm also a consumer of the pod. So anything you suffer, I suffer too, and I'm happy to work with you, and I have very much sympathy with PIs. The Pod 1 Associate Deans of Research are meeting weekly. So we're feeding back to each other if we think that there might be anything going wrong. The pod will also work with the provost. So the provost has talked about metrics for success, but has not yet determined what those metrics are. So we're going to work with the provost, and we're also going to work within the pod to develop what we think are appropriate metrics to monitor the performance of the pod. And we're not just looking about things like kind of proposal submissions and how quickly they get out the door, but also we're going to look at ways to monitor staff satisfaction and how the staff working within the pod are feeling, as well as the kind of raw metrics, because we understand that we have a very dedicated school research administrator team who will drop dead before not letting a proposal out the door in time. And so we want to make sure that we care for the staff well, and that we keep those staff happy and glad to be working at GW. As we devise metrics, as we devise measures of success, we will share those with the faculty and the staff. So there's nothing about this process that we intend to be non-transparent. And we're also always ready to hear your thoughts. You can either reach out to Dr. Freund, or you can reach out to us, to Juliana, or to myself. Where can you find information about the pod? It's a new thing. I'll share my slides with Max, and she can share them with all of you. And there's lots of links here that you can go to. So there's the Pod 1 blog. On the blog already, we have SRA portfolios. We have a link about effort reporting, because there's a new electronic effort reporting system in Banner that's launching just now. And we thought it was helpful to have a kind of primer on effort reporting on the blog, and also a guideline as to how to submit proposals. And if you can't find the information that you're looking for on the pod blog, then you can email Courtney, Juliana, or myself to ask questions. There are other resources, not just ours. So the OVPR website and the Office of Sponsored Projects all have useful information on them, and they're also adding more stuff about the blogs. OVPR's Research Enhancement Unit are very definitely worth looking in on. They can help develop proposals and offer other kinds of support. So it's worth taking a look there. And of course, there's the Sponsored Projects Handbook and the Office of Research Integrity. So the final question is, what is asked of faculty and research staff? Well, mainly we want you to be able to keep submitting proposals and doing research. So do what you like to do, what you have always done, and what you will continue to do well. We're asking that you be patient in the transition, but we're not asking that you be silently patient and suffer. We're asking that you alert us to any issues in order that we can fix things, right? We're early on in this process. We're figuring things out as we go. One of the senior leadership comments that I've heard repeatedly, and is not the best metaphor, but it does pretty much describe what we've been asked to do, is to build the plane while we're flying it. So if you notice any emergency exit doors hanging off in the wrong direction, please give us a shout and we will work with you to rectify things as quickly as possible. The other thing we would ask is that during the transition period, we're working on developing processes, we're working on developing procedures. There's a lot of things that people are working on besides their regular stuff. And so we would ask that in order to help out, that you notify us of proposal submissions in a timely manner. So at the moment, you send emails to Courtney, and Courtney will enter you in the system. So we have a system that's triggered by an intent to submit form that keeps you in an SRA dashboard. So we have an app that allows us to track how many proposals are currently being working on to make sure that nothing gets lost, nothing gets swept under the rug or accidentally forgotten. Or if somebody gets sick, that we make sure that somebody takes over, and Courtney will make sure that your proposals are entered into the system. We would ask that you try and get a first draft of the core documents needed for routing delivered to the SRAs 10 working days before the deadline. That seems like a long time, but it's not actually that far in advance, and this is just the first draft. And the reason we ask for that is because the OVPR 5 business days policy still remains in force, although they don't require the waiver form anymore. They still technically require 5 days to review your proposals. And so giving yourself 5 business days to work with the SRAs and refine your document so it's ready for routing is a wise idea for everyone. And I'd like to thank you in advance for your support. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Evie, I wonder, before we take questions, I wonder if you could go back and make sure that Juliana gets introduced here. I'm sorry, we missed that.
Sorry.
Yes, thank you.
I'm going to stop sharing so that people can actually see Juliana.
Good. And
so Juliana, would you like to turn on your video and introduce yourself?
Is my video not on?
It's on now.
You're good.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Juliana Smith, the manager for Pod 1. It's nice to meet everybody. We look forward to working together.
Great. And Juliana, you've done a great job of getting us started. Thank you. Bringing all kinds of new people into the house has not been an easy task. So we're really deeply appreciative of your kindnesses and friendship. Evie, I know it will be shocking, Juliana. I'm sure you can account for Evie's rapid pace. It must be that you are a nuclear physicist and you've always got to be on the ready. Evie, I think we have a number of questions, Meg, because this is also new to so many. Meg, do you want to get started on questions? And Evie, Juliana, Courtney, Vinnie, Kate, our finance director, Callie Altman, our partnership director, will all be available to respond to GSEHD specific questions. And then Juliana and Evie, if you can take on the pod questions, that would be great. Meg?
Sure. I have a couple questions here in the queue. The first one is, please describe fully what the roles of Courtney and Vinnie are in relation to servicing GSEHD versus the rest of the pod. So that's question number one.
Why don't we take that one from the top, just to clarify. So one of the conditions that we were working to protect in the formation of the pod and during the interview process, we were hoping to be able to be sure that the Elliott School portfolio would be able to remain, for instance, in the Elliott School pre-award person's hands until it grew too big, as we brought Joseph on. We also were very concerned about Courtney maintaining the relationship with all of the GSEHD faculty and following the processes that we've had in place that have worked out so, for the most part, so well. And so Courtney will do all the pre-award work for GSEHD, and we'll continue to do that until, as Evie mentioned a few minutes ago, until our portfolio gets so big and fabulous that we need to mix up with some other members of the pod to help her out. And that will give Courtney time to introduce GSEHD's work to the pod, to Juliana and to Evie and to the other members of the team, so that somebody's on the ready to support and back up Courtney going forward. I know all of you who have current awards can't live without Viney's guidance, goodwill, support, midnight emails, early morning responses to your midnight emails. And Viney will maintain until the pot gets too full, the post-award portfolio of GSEHD, and with a little bit of room, as some grants are soon to close out, she's picking up the business school post-award work. And Evie, it might be helpful for everybody to know sort of the proportions of load that means. You as the largest school in the pod, can we
in the structure of post-award, we've tried to work it out roughly on the basis of the volume of post-award transactions. So Gary Reynolds handles half of CCAS post-award, and he's handling around $7 million in post-award transactions. Abdiel, who's taking over Elliott, will be managing around $8 million of post-award transactions, and Viney was managing around 5 or 6 for GSEHD. And business, if I remember correctly, I need to go back and look for the exact numbers, is around $500,000 to $1.5 million. So that would bring Viney up kind of equivalent to the other people that are doing just post-award. If you guys grow, then we will find some other way to distribute some of the business stuff first. We would first try and keep GSEHD together. And then if GSEHD grows beyond what one post-award person can do, then we would work with Max to devise a way to spread that load more evenly throughout the pod. So we estimate that one full-time post-award person can do, a highly skilled person like Viney or Gary or Abdiel is becoming, can manage $7 to $8 million in post-award. And once it grows beyond that, then we need to share it out more evenly. So the CCAS total post-award is like 16 million. And that's why we have people that do pre and post for certain areas where the pre and post award is so heavily coupled. It makes more sense to have one person doing both. But we wouldn't change anything without careful discussion with Max and with Viney and with Courtney and the others involved. And you guys would be kept in the loop, and we would ensure a smooth transition if we had to make any changes. But at this point in time, you're retaining Courtney and Viney in the same way that they were before, the same kinds of support.
Next question, Meg.
So the next question is, how will the new pod structure impact our partnership office and our placement affiliation agreements with partner sites?
So that's a wonderful question, and probably an education even for Evie and Juliana, because we haven't had a moment to talk about our partnership office. So Callie is not on the research, is not classified as a research employee, but Callie does all of our legal work on partnerships with our partner schools and counseling mental health centers where our graduate students do their practicum, internship, and other clinical work efforts. The partnership office will remain as is, and Callie's load has grown considerably during the pandemic, but she's been more than ably available to both manage it and to make the transition with everybody to the virtual environment for counseling and teaching and learning. So I think we're in good shape. And Callie's here because Juliana and Evie, we have so many intersections of our partnership agreements with our funded projects. So the intersection of is significant. Meg?
So there is a question, are there any other universities who currently use this model? Some of those may have peers at other schools that we share research agendas with that we might be able to connect to get, in order to get a sense of issues that might actually have already come up for them, and we may learn from those. So the question is, are there other universities who currently use this model?
You want to take this?
So I believe there are some, because their provost was inspired by something somewhere. The way the pod model was presented to us, if I'm going to be truly honest, is we heard some whispers that there may be a pod model coming. And then we heard some whispers while I was on vacation that the pod model kickoff was going to begin this Friday. And then the Thursday night, I got an email saying, here are the talking points for the notification of your staff that the pod model is kicking in. So since that point, I've been working very closely with Max and Graham and Vanessa to try and make sure that we have a successful instigation of the pod model at GW, that we firstly retain the excellent staff that we have cultivated over the years and that know our faculty and know their research very well. And then that we start to figure out processes and mechanisms and how do we reach out to the faculty and let them know what's happening. And so we haven't yet been doing things like looking extensively at other pod models. We've been more trying to make sure that the initial stage of the pod model, right, that the initial just establishing things, making sure proposals get out the door on time, making sure that the new effort reporting system functions and that everybody can certify their effort as legally required. But as we start looking at things like metrics, as we start figuring out like the kind of definitions and the evolution of the pod, then would be the time for us to start reaching out and looking at other schools with similar models. So if any of you are aware or have collaborators that work in research pods, we would be very glad to hear any feedback that you care to give. And we will also do some outreach. I know Juliana is very active in participating and listening in lots of NCURA, the national, what's the full acronym for NCURA, Juliana? I always forget. It's National
Council of University Research Administrators.
Yep. So we can also kind of look at NCURA and see if there are some tips and some stuff that are presented maybe at the online NCURA conference that would be of use. So we're looking for information from all areas, and we'll start doing this research from our side. But in the initial stages, we were just focused on making sure that things ran in a manageable manner. But we're definitely interested in whatever you can find and provide.
I would just say that there hasn't been a moment to do much looking for models, but please, colleagues, if you are working with another institution or colleagues in another institution where there are pods, the question of metrics and return on investment appears to us to be very much on the provost's mind, and it would help us understand, it would help us to know what other institutions are using to guide their pods if they're engaged in pod work. Meg?
So this question is related to students. The research office has reached out to students that are fulfilling in-person placements in past. Now several of this person's students are in school districts that are considering reopening later this fall. Do they need to sign a GW waiver if time permits, or what are the protocols around that?
Callie, can you take that question?
Yeah, and hi everyone. Great question, and we have reached out to students in the past. So every GSEHD student, and for that matter, GW student that has an internship placement for credit has to fill out they're calling it a GW form or a GW waiver that outlines health and safety procedures. And this is coming from our Office of General Counsel. And we know that a lot of school districts right now are beginning to transition into in-person or hybrid models. And if this is the case, please just reach out to me via email, or you can fill out the face-to-face survey that I sent in August to just let us know which students or which school districts are looking to transition to in-person. And I'll be responsible for reaching out to that student to make sure that they sign the waiver. And it protects GW and it protects the students, so it's very important.
Thanks, Callie. This is, by the way, driven by by academic requirements. So if a student is fulfilling an internship that's part of an academic requirement in an accredited program, the university is requiring that every student in that situation see and sign the waiver in order to be face-to-face in COVID during the pandemic. Meg?
I actually don't see any other questions right now in the queue. Just maybe somebody wants to raise their hand, or there's some other things that you'd like to address.
I can't see hands, so I'm going to lean on you.
I don't see any hands raised right now.
Let me just go around the panelists. I'm sure there's some things that Evie and I missed in preparing this. Juliana, would you like to add anything that we haven't covered?
No, I think we're good. I mean, I do feel like we're making good progress as a pod. When we talk to the other pod managers, I think we are in pretty good shape. I think we're coming together very nicely. I've really enjoyed working with Courtney and Viney too.
Thank you. Callie, anything else that you would put on the docket from the partnership perspective?
I guess while we're waiting for other people to put forward some questions, I guess I just wanted to say that we are looking to make the partnership process easier going forward. So I'm looking to create an inclusive partnership list to distribute to faculty members, either on Box Drive or on Google Docs, something that can be continuously updated. So when you're looking to put your students into placements for the upcoming spring or upcoming summer terms, you'll actually have a list of, okay, so here's where all of my counseling placement sites are, and here's where we have current affiliation agreements in place. So it'll be a lot more helpful and hopefully a lot smoother process. And then just, of course, always just letting us know far and ahead of time if you have a student that's going to a new placement site. It's really important. We work really quickly on our end. It takes just like less than a day on our end, but especially with larger school districts or with state-run counseling and rehabilitation sites, it can take quite a bit of time. So just so we have that leeway. And then just lastly, I have worked with a lot of you on research agreements in the past, and I just want to say that this process will remain the same. So it'll be between Courtney and I doing the same type of work. So if you have any of those going forward, just reach out in the same way.
Thanks, Callie. Okay. Courtney, pre-award. Viney, you're next. So warm up here. Courtney?
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I wish that I could see all of your faces. It's been forever since we've had the opportunity to connect, but luckily, through many conference calls and a few Zoom meetings here and there, we've been able to catch up, at least a few of us. So as part of this transition, obviously, we are going to try and do everything in our power to alleviate as much disruption as possible. One of the things that I know is in progress at the OVPR or the OSP level is some revision to the proposal checklist. So as those updates become available, I will certainly make sure that we are including all of those points in the checklist that I normally send out to folks when we start the proposal development process. One of the other points that I just wanted to piggyback on from what Callie was saying is that on that checklist, I will also be adding a point there just for us to take a few minutes when we're talking about the opportunities that you're responding to, just to talk through this notion of whether or not there are going to be placements, or if the research is going to involve going into schools, organizations, units where there may be a few extra T's to cross and I's to dot with regards to being able to conduct the research in a safe manner for everyone involved. So we'll just make sure to keep all that information updated as it becomes available. And then I think the last thing that I would add to that is that as a common theme that you've heard throughout everybody's presentations is that, there's been some, depending on who you talk to, some downsizing or some right sizing. And with that certainly comes, higher volume, higher responsibility on everyone. One of the things that we as a school, and this is something that I would like to own with you as PIs, is making sure that we are taking just one extra double check, triple check of documentation before it gets submitted to CAIUs. That the review process is being shortened a little bit to try and help with timeline of delivering proposals. And so I would just ask for your help in making sure that documents are spot checked at least once on your end before they get to me. And then obviously, I will work with you to work on any other points that need attention. But I look forward to continuing to work with all of you. And I am very sure that in light of everything that's going on in the world, that you all are going to be putting forward some really interesting and insightful and hopefully very beneficial work very soon. So I look forward to seeing all of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Courtney. Vinnie, can you just give us a summary of where you're sitting in terms of post-award work?
Yes. So what I will continue to do is just monitor the projects as they are. I'll be reaching out to faculty about any issues I see with the projects, with overspending, underspending, no cost extensions, student hires, anything you need to kind of manage your projects. I will be there for you. Everybody knows how to reach me. I do email early and late. So anytime you want to reach out to me with any questions, just please do.
Thanks, Vinnie. Evie, I want to come back to a point. Meg, will you just let us know if there's some questions that are coming just before so that we can take them before we wrap. But Evie, there are two issues. One is that one that Courtney just referred to, which is the greater responsibility at the pod level in pre-award. Can you spend a minute sort of updating people about that as we understand it to the moment?
So the major issue is that OVPR have lost a lot of staff. And so they were already slackening the OVPR used to check every jot and tittle, like is every I dotted, is every T crossed, is your font size 12, is it a Times New Roman font, and you would have a ton of arguments. So partly in response to the fact that the number of staff in OVPR is going down, but partly also in response to the research ecosystem reviews. OVPR started saying, okay, so we're no longer checking font sizes or margins. And that kind of has rolled back and rolled back and rolled back. And basically what it comes down to is what's left of OVPR is checking compliance. If your budget wouldn't get us hung, then they'll let the proposal out the door. If we as a pod are not then careful, then we would miss things that might result in proposals being bounced or rejected without review. And so this is the other reason that we're saying, please make sure you get things in plenty of time. When people rush, that's when mistakes are made, and then it costs more time than it saves doing it at the last minute, because you'll make all the effort to write the proposal, we'll submit it, and then it'll be rejected without review because we're missing one document, or because your font size is wrong and we didn't spot it. So we're going to make every effort at the pod level to try and compensate. There's even been some discussion of having 2 reviewers within the pod. And that's something that we would love to do. It's an aim that we had in CCAS before all of this pod stuff started, that we would try and implement a kind of second level of review. Whether that's feasible with the reduced staffing in the pod is not yet clear. At the moment, we're working things out, but there are fewer staff than there were before this all started. So whether we can put in full additional reviews is another guess, anyone's guess at this point in time until we figure out the exact loads. But basically what it comes down to is OVPR are going to do everything they need to do to make sure a proposal is legal and has the appropriate indirect cost rate and the appropriate fringe rate, but they're not checking any more things that can result in a proposal being rejected without review. They're not going to necessarily check that you have all the documents that they think you should have. They're going to do the bare minimum, and then the proposal is going to go out the door. So we're going to need to have more responsibility and more oversight at the pod level to ensure that the things that go to OVPR are ready, that final legal checking is all they need.
I think this is an example. I'm sorry, Courtney, go ahead. Courtney, was that you?
I'm good.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I thought you were about to speak, Courtney. I was just going to say that I think we have to be honest here. A consequence of the pod formation and the need to downsize as part of the mitigation effort in the university is a slimmer workforce in every way. And I appreciate I appreciate the honesty that we've all we're committed to having about how much more work this means with our team in the pod, and how we're going to have to support you as PIs to make sure that we don't let something out the door that we haven't had time to catch and think about with you in order to get the best proposal to the funders. And this is just taking a tremendous amount of time, and we're doing this with care. And actually, as an example of how much time it's taken, I know that Evie's been in one pod meeting already today. I have as well. We will be in another pod meeting in addition to this one at 5 o'clock this afternoon with the other ADRs. So if a third of our day each day is committed just to pod meetings, you can imagine when the work is being done. Please ask. I've got you get into a proposal opportunity and you see some things that you've never seen before. Bring them to our attention, because we can work through them with you if we have enough lead time, and we will work hard to make this happen. But this is a consequence of the mitigation efforts as a result of the pandemic. There's no question. A downsized staff is a downsized staff, and we'll do our best.
I mean, the one advantage with the collaboration, though, is sometimes a foundation or some funder that has kind of odd behaviours or odd requirements is new to one school, but had perhaps done stuff with another school before. So one of the advantages, we're all aware of the disadvantage, but one of the advantages of the pod is that the SRA teams that were formerly SRA teams that were separate from three schools are now working very closely together and swapping stories, swapping information. If one of them encounters something, they share it on Slack. We have a very active Slack messaging group that they're communicating on, and they're providing each other with help and resources as well. So from Courtney and Vinnie's perspective, they've just gained 9 teammates who are all happy to help and provide information. And Courtney has been an absolute angel in providing support for foundations and things that she's worked with that we haven't yet. So there are certain aspects of this that are great and encouraging of collaboration, and we're going to work on the other aspects and try and establish metrics with which we can demonstrate if the workload is too much for the volume of people that we have, then we will advocate for more, because ultimately we want the pod to be successful in the sense that we want the pod to successfully support all of your research and provide the best support, best quality of support possible. And if it's not doing that, we want to hear about it, we want to fix it. And where necessary, we will advocate for more resources as we can demonstrate that it's needed.
Meg, are there any questions in the queue?
Actually, there is one.
So you're on.
It's a 3-part question. It begins with, will PIs be responsible for entering proposals into Cayuse? And then for PIs, is there a new portal that is being built based on the pod model? And finally, the third part is cost share still an issue that our dean addresses, or does this now go to the pod?
So let me take the last question first, and then I'm going to turn this over to Evie and Courtney and Juliana and anybody else that wants to weigh in here. I want to go back to what Evie said at the beginning. The administrative responsibilities for research are in the pod's hands. Any cost sharing or any other relationships that we have that are specific, that a PI has that are specific to GSEHD, will route through GSEHD. So for instance, you have a request for cost sharing, that is on GSEHD, and we will have a routing process that will include, Kate, are you still with us? Yes. Our finance director, Kate Brandon, popped up someplace, I hope. Yeah, I can't see you, Kate, but you're there. So Kate will become, and actually tomorrow we have our 11 o'clock on Thursday OR/ER meetings, and one of the first items on the agenda is taking a look at a routing model so that faculty PIs will know in GSEHD how to come to not just the pod, but also to me and to Kate and also to the dean, to make sure that any cost sharing or other shared responsibilities are approved by finance and by the dean, so that your proposals can be submitted. Evie, you want to take the first 2 parts of that question?
So PIs will be responsible for Cayuse at the same level that PIs are currently responsible for Cayuse. So at the point where you notify us that you have a proposal that you want to submit typically the SRA, so Courtney for you guys, or if Courtney was out sick, then whoever Juliana would appoint would then create the CAUs for you, tell you which documents needed to be there, and you would work collaboratively with the SRA to upload things. So in some cases, we have PIs that are super active and want to upload documents themselves. In other cases, the PIs will send it to the SRA. So basically, it's the same level of support, or what we are aiming for is the same level of support that you have always had. There is a new portal under discussion, but not because of the pod model. That new portal, Huron, was under discussion because of, so I have printed out here both ecosystem review full reports, and one of the complaints that they had was the number of different systems, and as a result of that, the Office of Sponsored Projects was already working towards having a life cycle system that will ultimately replace CAUs, but that's nothing to do with the pods. That's being, I think that the aim is to have it rolled out by next year. Juliana, isn't it? You're part of the Huron working group?
Yeah. The virus has pushed us back, and it probably won't actually go into implementation until next fall.
But so what will Huron cover? Is a replacement for CAUs? Are there other things?
It's definitely the replacement for CAUs. They're still discussing how it will, PI dashboard won't go away. So they're still discussing what post-award functions it will be able to have. But I don't think it's going to be as post-award supportive as what maybe was initially announced. But I think a lot of those details are still being worked out because of systems being able to talk to each other.
Okay, so there is a new system in the offing, and some of you may have heard the rumors, but that's nothing to do with the pods. The new system, work on it started before the pods were a glimmer in the provost's eye. Or potentially before the provost was the provost. This is how long it takes us to move on new systems. But in terms of CAUs, you'll receive the support that you always have. At the moment, what we've agreed with Courtney, so in some of the other schools, the aim is to have the PIs fill in an intent to submit form. So at the moment, you guys just email Courtney and say, I have a proposal to submit, and she does all the magic on the back end. If things become heavier, if it works out that the workload becomes too much, then what we might eventually ask you to do would be to fill in the intent to submit form yourself, but we're not at that point. Courtney and Juliana have agreed that it'll continue to be an email to Courtney, and then Courtney will fill in the form for you. And that may evolve over time, but it's not complicated. It's just a form. The only thing is just now, in order to get you guys direct access to the form personally, we would need IT to enable you all, and IT are currently in the process of restructuring. So you'll be safe from that for a little while at least. Courtney will complete the intent to submit form, and that puts you in the system. And then you get the email from Juliana telling you that Courtney's going to work on you with your project, and it goes from there. So the only difference from you is that you now get a nice polite email from Juliana. And then other than that, the service that you receive, I believe, is pretty much the same as it would always have been. COSHR, as Max says, all the other things that would be approved by the schools are still approved by the schools. And if you upload a COSHR form into CAUs as standard now, then that's what you'll continue to do. And the only changes we would make in something like that is if the school team get together and say, actually, now that we're thinking about this, we want to take the opportunity to do it differently. And we would then respect whatever the school requests that we do. So the function of the pod is to enact in practical administrative terms the policies of the school and the policies of GW. It's not to change those policies in any way or to enforce new mechanisms of working.
Thank you, Evie. Meg, I think we have time for one more question if there's one in the queue.
Sure, I have one more question, and then I do have a comment from the dean that he asked me to read for you. So the question is from a faculty person, and it's basically, has the move towards the pods change the ways in which we can work with the administrators in the Office of Corporate and Foundation Relations?
CFR are completely separate from the pods. They are their own thing. And then for some of the proposals, if they're determined to be sponsored research, then it would run through the pod as it currently would run through Courtney or Vinnie. Is there anything more than that we need to say, Max?
No, I think Sarah Katz and Susan Bursling have joined us because they too are learning about the pods as Evie described, she learned the night before the day that her vacation was supposed to come to an end. And that was about 24 hours before I learned of that fact. So, Susan and Sarah, I'm glad we're here. And I think DAR is trying to work together, corporate and foundation, to figure out how to intersect. And everybody's been tremendously available. And we're deeply appreciative of that opportunity, not just for GSEHD, but for the whole pod. And we'll have to keep working at that. I think it's a great question. We'll get back to it as time allows.
I think it also is useful to know that CFR, like corporate and foundation relations, and DAR typically reach out to the ADR to ask them to disseminate or target opportunities. And I imagine that structure of working still remains the same, because the research development side of things, right, helping you identify proposals or encouraging you to submit to specific opportunities, that's a school level responsibility. That's an ADR responsibility. I'll do it for CCAS. And if I spot something cool that I think Max might be interested in, I'll forward it to Max. But ultimately, what people encourage you to do comes from the ADR of your school. So for CFR, the channel of communication, the correct channel of communication remains the same, then it goes to the ADR. And they work because they best know the faculty in their school and who would be best suited for different opportunities.
Well, I always love when Dean Foyer closes a meeting. I'm going to let him almost close the meeting. Go ahead, Meg.
Sure. So he asked me to read this. He was here until just about 10 minutes ago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So he says, special thanks to Evie and Juliana. A pleasure to meet you, even virtually. And of course, to our GSEHD team, Max, Courtney, Viney, Callie, and Kate. You continue to be off the charts. Amazing. So that's his closing message.
Well, thank you. You did that well, Meg, and I appreciate the Dean's comments. And Evie and Julianne, I did not know Michael was on. I'm so sorry. We'll redo this. To GSEHD, please just email us. We will get Evie's slides out to you with updated information. I'm sure there will be 1,000 questions as you're starting a proposal or completing an already undertaken grant and closing it out. From womb to tomb, as we used to say, we're still with you on this. And if you'll just keep us in the line of communication, I think we'll be able to work through this very unusual and sudden new arrangement of research administration. But you can see, I hope, that we've got a great team. And then when you meet the rest of the Pod 1 team, I think you'll feel same. I'll look forward to hearing from you, and I appreciate the fact that you all have taken this time this afternoon. A special thanks to Juliana and Evie, and to Courtney, Viney, Kate, and Callie. We've just all been working really hard and together, and it's been, it's going to get us further. Thank you very, very much for the time. Take care. Thanks, Meg. You're, as always, the best moderator. I hear there's a debate tonight that's looking for a little bit of help. So if you have some time.
Click on my PP and get right there.
Take good care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.